It was the very influential 20th century French philosopher Alain who made the best known of all the comments on this portrait of Descartes, which we are looking at. Alain said, "This is a terrible man to have as your teacher. He looks at you as if to say, here is another one who will never get things straight." Or as a contemporary teacher might say, here is another knucklehead, another fool, another dum-dum. Fortunately, Descartes was never a teacher. We have seen Descartes' hard, cold, mathematical reasoning combined with his passionate personal drive for certainty. We have seen these arrive at a rational, absolutely certain geometrical proof. Step by step he established, first that I exist, then that God exists, then that the physical world exists, and that all of my clear and distinct self-evident ideas are true, since God guarantees them, and that the whole of the physical and human worlds correspond, therefore, to my clear and distinct ideas. Thus, my rational, clear, and distinct self-evident ideas are the key to nature, to all of reality, and mathematics is the key to reason. Cartesian rationalism is as bold a claim for human reason as has ever been made. Cartesian rationalism is the claim that the structure of the world corresponds to the structure of our reason, of our rational ideas. But let us look at this reality, at this world which Descartes constructed and which he claims to be a true picture of the world in which we live. The most striking feature of the Cartesian world, of reality as Descartes' philosophy describes it, is that it erects a split, a division, a duality, a dichotomy between two different kinds of reality, between mental, spiritual, thinking substance, such as myself and God, and, on the other hand, physical, spatially extended substance, such as my body, mountains, flowers, dogs, planets. These two kinds of substances constitute two different and separate worlds. They represent two realities. Between them there is a gap which can never be bridged. As we've said, Descartes cuts the pie of reality in two. Descartes here has presented the classic case of a dualism within reality, of metaphysical dualism. Dualism is the name for any theory which claims that there are two ultimate and irreducible components in the subject, whatever the subject may be, to be explained. Cartesian dualism is called psychophysical dualism, to indicate that the duality consists of the psychological, conscious, mental kind of reality on the one hand, and of the physical, spatial, extended kind of reality on the other hand. Psychophysical dualism may be defined as the doctrine that reality has two kinds of attributes, mental and physical, and that the one kind of attribute can never be shown to be a form of or be reduced to the other. So, for psychophysical dualism, mind can never be shown to be derived from, or a form of, or a function of, or reducible to matter. Cartesian psychophysical dualism formulates its doctrine in terms of substances, since for Descartes, as we have seen, attributes, such as mental or physical, cannot exist except as the attributes of substances. Thus, you remember, this is how Descartes proved that my being conscious of the attribute of thinking showed necessarily that I exist as a thinking substance, that is, as the substance in which the attribute of thinking is going on. Also, you remember, this is how he showed that my clear and distinct ideas of the attribute of extension proved that substances with the attribute of extension exist as the cause of my ideas. Thus, Cartesian psychophysical dualism is the doctrine that reality consists of two kinds of substances. One, thinking, mental, spiritual substances, and to extended physical spatial substances. Now we can understand why Cartesian psychophysical dualism is regarded as the sharpest and clearest formulation of metaphysical dualism. It is because Descartes has made one attribute, one property or quality, the principal attribute of each kind of substance. And he determined which the principal attribute is by this question: what is my clear and distinct idea of this thing? What is my clear and distinct idea of its essential, necessary quality or attribute? And for mental, spiritual substance, the principal attribute is thinking. It is therefore a thinking kind of substance, substance which is conscious, which means for Descartes it thinks, doubts, understands, affirms, denies, wills, refuses, imagines, and feels. But this attribute of thinking is the very attribute which is distinctly lacking in the piece of wax, in spatially extended bodies, and in the motion of bodies from one space or place to another. It is lacking in the mechanical clicking of earthly clockworks. It is lacking in the celestial movement of the planets. It is lacking in the bodies of animals and humans. There is no consciousness in any of these. And physical substance is defined, on the other hand, by its being extended in space. Physical substance is measurable by geometry, which is the science of spatial measurement. Its motion is mechanical. And it is, in fact, the case that a physical substance moves on impact, as the cogs in a machine impact upon the cogs in other wheels, as one billiard ball impacts upon another. But being physically extended is the very attribute or property which is lacking to mental substances. Minds, thinking things, consciousness, these are not extended in space, they are not measurable, they are not in motion, they do not function like clockwork. Was it by mechanical clockwork that Descartes resolved for once in his life to doubt everything, to overthrow all his beliefs, to attempt to use methodological skepticism in order to reach an absolutely certain belief? That was no clockwork. That was nothing mechanical. That was the masterful triumph of a free spirit, of a thinking thing, of a mental substance. Thinking substance, mental, spiritual reality, by definition, lacks any spatial extension, occupies no space, is not measurable or quantifiable, is not in motion. Where, for example, is thinking? In my head? Physical substance, spatially extended, mathematically measurable, lacks any mental, spiritual, or conscious attribute. Physical things cannot think. Physical things have no consciousness. And so we are confronted by the dual, twofold substances and their attributes of Descartes' world. On the one hand, spatially extended mechanical substances, which have no consciousness and no mind. On the other hand, mental, conscious, spiritual, thinking substances which have no body and have no spatial extension. Descartes' psychophysical dualism was well expressed by an old English couplet which says, "What is matter? Never mind. What is mind? No matter." And there is no way in which the absolute differences between these two kinds of reality can ever be bridged, abolished, or overcome. The gap, the chasm that opens between them can never be closed. For this reason, Cartesian dualism is the most extreme example of psychophysical dualism in the history of modern philosophy. But we may see how extreme Cartesian psychophysical dualism is by looking at it in terms of another problem, a problem which has tormented philosophy ever since the time of St. Augustine, and that is the problem of free will and determinism. Since, as Descartes says, nothing comes from nothing, and everything that exists has a cause, determinism takes over from this and argues that everything that exists is the necessary and inevitable result of its causes, and could not be otherwise than it is. Modern determinism, from the time of Descartes, was inspired by science and its necessary causal laws, and modern determinism is accordingly the view that everything that happens necessarily and follows some causal law of science. Determinism characterizes the world of spatially extended substances in motion. Physical bodies move as the necessary and inevitable result of pressure or impact on them or other bodies. This is the way the planets move. Their motion is determined by the necessary mechanical laws of astronomy. This is the way the machinery of a clockwork moves, by the necessary causal impact of one cogged wheel upon another, with the movement of the second wheel being the necessary and inevitable effect of the first wheel. It is in total opposition to the necessary, dependent, bound, inevitable, and mechanical determinism of the physical universe, which Descartes, Copernicus, and Galileo had described. There stands, in opposition to all of this, the free will of spiritual, thinking, mental substance. The doctrine of free will is the denial that determinism applies to the actions of human beings. Free will is the doctrine which claims that human beings are unlike the mechanical motion of planets or of clockwork machinery. The doctrine of free will claims that human beings are not determined by antecedent causes in what they choose to do. As conscious thinking substances, they are free in their moral choices. They are not causally determined in their actions. And so, if you pass through a picket line, if you make a contribution to a church or to a political party, if you are insulting to another human being, if you are physically cruel to an animal, if you are a criminal or a saint, the doctrine of free will claims that these acts are done out of your own free will, that you are a free agent in doing them, and in all your other actions as well. And therefore, since antecedent causes are not responsible for your actions, you are responsible, since your will was free to do or not to do the action. But the doctrine of determinism claims that you are not responsible, that your action was the inevitable and necessary result of a host of antecedent causes working upon you. This issue between free will and determinism is especially controversial today in the field of criminal psychiatry, in which the question is the criminal's act the necessary result of antecedent causes, so that he could not help doing what he did, or was he free to do otherwise? These questions have important consequences for the treatment of criminals. Is crime the inevitably determined effect of necessary prior causes? Or does the criminal attacker have a free will in choosing his actions? Is his biological heritage to blame for his action, or an unloving family, or the capitalist system of society? Are these to be blamed for his act, or is the criminal responsible for his own action? For Descartes, it is of course the case that human beings, as thinking, conscious, mental substances, are free in their thinking, affirming, denying, and willing. As Descartes says, the freedom of the human will is infinite. Human beings have infinite freedom in the power to make moral decisions and are accordingly responsible for their moral decisions. Thus, Descartes' dualism of thinking and spatially extended substances establishes the opposition between thinking substances as having free will and physical substances as being subject to causal determinism. But the full impact of Cartesian dualism is yet to be mentioned. It is the impact of Cartesian dualism upon me, the individual human being. It is not only the world which consists of two irreducible, divergent, distinct, opposing substances and their attributes, but it is the individual human being who now may be seen to be split in two by Cartesian psychophysical dualism. Am I not a thinking thing, a mind, a consciousness with free will? But am I not also a body, spatially extended, measurable, quantifiable, an organic mechanism, a clockwork which is causally determined? But now I see that according to Descartes, my mind and body are utterly, absolutely distinct. As in the universe itself, with its two kinds of substances, mental and physical, there is in me the same absolute, unbridgeable gulf between mind, which occupies no space, and body, which cannot think. There is in me the same lack of unity, the same division and duality. I myself consist of two separate substances. Moreover, the two substances which make up the human being are not of equal significance. For did not Descartes show that I am a thinking thing, that I am a substance whose nature it is to think, and that my principal attribute is thinking? I am then a mental substance, a thinking thing. What then is the relation of my body as extended substance to myself as thinking thing? Descartes himself tries to tell us in Meditation 6, where he says, since on the one hand I have a clear and distinct idea of myself, insofar as I am only a thinking thing and not an extended being, and since on the other hand I have a distinct idea of body, insofar as it is only an extended substance which does not think, it is certain that this I, that is to say, my soul, by virtue of which I am what I am, he says, is entirely and truly distinct from my body, and that my soul can exist without my body. My mind, according to Descartes, is therefore not only entirely different in its attributes from my body, but it is totally independent of my body and may exist without it. And as Descartes has shown us, I know my own mind better than I know any physical thing, including my own body. Then how shall I understand my relationship as a thinking thing to my own body? My body does not belong to my nature. Perhaps is it the case that the soul uses the body to house itself? Or is it that the soul not only uses the body as its habitat, but also directs some of the movements of the body, and so is like a pilot on a ship directing it, as Descartes himself suggests? Descartes' sharp correspondent, Arnaud, the young theologian, who wrote the sixth set of objections to the Meditations, pounced on this problem immediately. The sharp theologian Arnaud wrote to Descartes that since Descartes has clearly and distinctly perceived himself to be a thinking thing, this leads to the conclusion that man is, as Arnaud says, entirely spirit, while his body is merely the vehicle of spirit. Whence follows the definition of man as a spirit which makes use of a body. Descartes has led us into this extreme dualism of mind and body, of an immaterial soul housed in a material body, according to which they are so completely different that there can be no interaction between my own mind and my own body. But this runs counter to the evidence of everyday life, in which my mind and my body are constantly interacting. My body influences my mind when my body has to cope with a huge Sunday dinner, or with a large intake of beer or hard liquor, or even a small intake of a narcotic. My mind in all of these cases will soon register that it has been affected. It becomes dull, my ideas are no longer clear and distinct, the distinction between dream and reality begins to blur. But how is this possible on the basis of Descartes' dualism? And conversely, the evidence of everyday life shows that my mind influences my body, that the causal relationship can also be from the mind to the body. For example, I decide in my mind to salute the flag, or to wave goodbye, or to shake hands, or to whistle for my dog, or to run for a bus. And I salute, I wave, I shake hands, I whistle, I run. But according to Descartes' dualism, these could not happen. These actions which my mind has caused in my body are impossible. For how could my mind, which occupies no space, is not physical, make my body move? Motion is an attribute only of physical things, and can be caused only by billiard ball or clockwork impact upon other physical things. Why has Descartes led us into this impasse, in which his extreme dualistic separation of mind and body denies what anyone can plainly see, that mind and body do interact, that they are not such different kinds of reality, that mind cannot produce at will a handshake, and that body cannot produce a feeling of pleasant dullness in the mind? The answer to why Descartes has led us down this blind alley is that he was seeking, as we know, a compromise, a reconciliation between the powerful new science and its mechanical, deterministic laws of motion of physical bodies in space, and, on the other hand, with the powerful old church, with its dogmas of a perfect, infinite spiritual being who created man, who is a finite and imperfect spiritual being, this God who also created an earthly habitat for man. For the church, truth about reality came from divine revelation, not from science. It seemed to Descartes that his dualism provided a compromise to ease the bitter enmity between the new science and the church. He believed that he had achieved this compromise by the dualism of completely distinct substances. This dualism provides that physical substance, its motion according to causal laws, its determinism, its predictability, would be the exclusive province which science controls. And immune from science, on the other hand, immune from the laws of physics and from determinism, is mental substance. Mental substance is spiritual, conscious, not spatially extended, not quantifiable, not predictable. Mental substance does have free will. It is capable of spontaneity. It is able to know the eternally true ideas which are innate within it of self, God, and nature. It is able to be thinking, remembering, feeling, responsible, and moral. This kind of substance would be under the exclusive jurisdiction of the church, with no interference from science. And so, as we've seen, Descartes cuts the pie of reality, giving the physical and scientific side to the scientists and the spiritual side to the theologians and philosophers. And thus the Cartesian theory of dual substances appeared to Descartes to effect a compromise between the church and the scientists, to each its own jurisdiction. To the scientists, matter and its mechanical laws of motion. To the theologians of the church, mental substance, the souls of human beings. This is the Cartesian compromise. But Descartes himself was unhappy with his psychophysical dualism. He was perfectly well aware of the interaction between mind and body, and he tried to show that interaction was possible on his own strictly dualistic theory. He argued, in what is perhaps the weakest contribution of his entire philosophy, that interaction between the soul and the body is possible because the soul is primarily located in the pineal gland in the brain, and there the soul acts as a thinking substance, but at the same time it also receives sensations from the body. The pineal gland, he argued, is the transfer point between soul or mind and body. Through the pineal gland, the soul can move the muscles and nerves of the body, and the motions of the body can in turn influence the mind. Unfortunately for Descartes' argument, there is absolutely no evidence that the pineal gland has such functions. It has other functions, in fact. Moreover, the pineal gland device cannot explain how an extended immaterial soul can have an effect on a part of the brain, or how the physical pineal gland can have any effect upon the immaterial soul. A last point on Descartes' psychophysical dualism. Descartes' attempt to show that there was indeed the possibility of interaction between soul and body, mind and matter, had destructive consequences for the Cartesian compromise that he had placed so much stress upon. For if the immaterial spiritual soul can bring about, through the pineal gland, changes in its body, and by means of the body on other bodies, this would destroy the new science and its mechanical motion by introducing a spiritual element into causality. I myself, as a spiritual thinking thing, become then a strange alien cause in a mechanistic causal world. And on the other hand, if through the pineal gland my body can bring about changes in my mind, then my mind is affected by the laws of motion of the body and becomes part of the mechanical clockwork of the body. So interaction would destroy the mechanistic laws of science, or it would destroy the mind as an independent, immaterial substance. And so the Cartesian compromise fails. It fails either because there is no interaction between mind and body, or if there is interaction, this destroys the mechanism of science, or it destroys the independence of the mind. Although the Cartesian compromise failed, the influence of Descartes remains alive and a potent force. For over 300 years since the Meditations appeared in 1641, Cartesianism has dominated the intellectual world. To be a philosopher at all, you must deal with him. You can agree or disagree or find another path, but you must deal with Descartes' skepticism, his rationalism, his mathematical model of truth, his cogito proof, his subjectivism, his metaphysical dualism of mental and physical substances, and his attempt to make peace between religion and science. Writing 100 years later, the Scottish philosopher David Hume dealt with Descartes by violently opposing him. Hume opposed Descartes' rationalism with a more powerful empiricism. He opposed Descartes' skepticism with a more powerful skepticism. He rejected the cogito proof and Descartes' proof of God as nonsense. He rejected Descartes' metaphysical dualism with its claim that there are two kinds of substances by denying that we can ever have any proof that mental or physical substances exist. Hume opposed Descartes' causal mechanism by destroying Descartes' idea of cause and effect. We may say that Hume dealt with Descartes by destroying him. In turning to David Hume, we are about to encounter the excitement of the most destructive force in the history of Western philosophy.
Pre-recorded in the studios of the Maryland Center for Public Broadcasting.